The woman standing outside the dusty saloon in Prescott, Arizona territory, looked like a ghost that nobody wanted to see, thin and hollow-eyed, her dress hanging on her frame like something borrowed from a better life. And when men passed her on the boardwalk, they averted their eyes, as though she carried plague rather than simply poverty and shame. Zelda Anderson had been beautiful once. That was in 1873, 3 years ago now in this summer of 1876, when her father owned the general store and her mother played piano at the church socials. Back then, young men tipped their hats and stumbled over their words when she walked past. Her family had been respected, welcomed at every table, invited to every gathering. She had been loved, or so she thought. Then the fever came. It swept through Prescott like a demon, taking souls without discrimination. Her mother died first, then her little brother Tommy, then her father. Within 2 weeks, Zelda went from the merchant's cherished daughter to an orphan with nothing but debts, and a building the bank wanted. The people who had smiled at her family's table, who had praised her mother's music and bought goods on credit from her father, suddenly remembered only what was owed, not what was shared. Her father's business partner claimed there had been papers signed, documents that gave him ownership. Zelda could not read the legal language well enough to argue. The store was sold. The house went to pay debts that seemed to multiply like rabbits. Her mother's piano, her father's watch, Tommy's toy soldiers, everything was auctioned. People she had known her whole life bid on her family's belongings without meeting her eyes. The aunts and uncles who should have taken her in all had reasons why they could not. Too many mouths to feed already. Not enough room. Times were hard. Her mother's sister, Aunt Caroline, who had bounced Zelda on her knee as a child, turned her away from the door. Her father's brother, Uncle James, had moved his family to California without leaving word of where she could find them. The church ladies murmured their sympathies, but offered no real help. The reverend suggested she might find work as a laundress or perhaps a kitchen girl at one of the restaurants. But those positions went to women with families who could vouch for them, who had connections and support. Zelda had neither. She tried. God knew she tried. She took work where she could find it, scrubbing floors, washing clothes until her hands cracked and bled, mending garments late into the night by candlelight that cost money she did not have. But Prescott was a small town with limited opportunities for a woman alone. The wages she earned barely kept her fed, left nothing for proper lodging. She slept in a storage shed behind the livery for a while, until the owner's wife found out and chased her off, calling her ungrateful and accusing her of trying to tempt her husband. The descent was not sudden but gradual, a slow slide into invisibility. People stopped saying her name. They called her that girl, or that poor creature, or nothing at all. When she walked into a shop, conversations stopped. When she sat in church, pews emptied around her as though loss might be contagious. The town that had once embraced her family now wanted only to forget she existed. She worked at the saloon now, not as one of the painted ladies upstairs, but cleaning, hauling water, scrubbing spittoons and mopping floors. The saloon owner, a man named Dutch Carver with a belly that strained his vest buttons, paid her in coins and occasionally leftover stew. It was barely survival. She had a room in a boarding house that rented to people nobody else would take. A space so small she could touch both walls with her arms outstretched, with a window that did not close properly and let in dust and cold, and the sounds of arguments from the other rooms. She was 21 years old and felt ancient, this particular afternoon, standing outside the saloon catching her breath from hauling buckets up from the well. Zelda watched a group of women across the street. She recognized them all. Sarah Mitchell, who had been in her Sunday school class. Margaret Porter, whose wedding Zelda had attended just before the fever came. Beth Ann Coulter, who had once borrowed a dress from Zelda's mother and never returned it. They stood together talking, their faces animated, and when one of them glanced toward Zelda, she quickly looked away and said something that made the others laugh. They had forgotten her. Not forgotten that she existed, but forgotten who she had been, forgotten that she was a person who had once belonged to their world. To them, she was just the girl who cleaned the saloon, someone beneath notice, separate from their lives of tea parties and church socials and respectable concerns. Zelda turned away, blinking against the sting in her eyes. She would not cry. Tears were a luxury like hope that she could not afford. She went back inside the saloon, into the dim interior that smelled of whiskey and tobacco and sweat. The floor needed scrubbing before the evening customers arrived. She fetched her bucket and brush and got on her knees, working the bristles against the boards worn smooth by countless boots. Zelda. The voice came from behind her, deep and rough like gravel underfoot. She had not heard anyone enter. Her shoulders tensed, waiting for whatever crude comment or demand would follow. Men in saloons rarely spoke to her with kindness, but when she looked up, she did not recognize the man standing there, though something in his face seemed distantly familiar. He was massive, easily over 6 feet tall with shoulders that seemed too wide for the doorway, arms thick with muscle visible even beneath his buckskin shirt. His hair was dark and hung past his shoulders, tied back with a leather cord. His face was weathered and tanned, with a strong jaw shadowed by stubble and eyes the color of a winter sky. He looked like something wild that had wandered down from the mountains. His clothes were rough-hewn, his boots scuffed from hard travel. A large knife hung at his belt in a worn leather sheath. Everything about him spoke of wilderness and survival, of living in places where men made their own rules. "You are Zelda Anderson," he said. It was not a question. She set down her scrub brush and slowly stood, wiping her wet hands on her stained apron. "Who are you?" "Ethan Lang. I knew your father." The name stirred a memory, faint and distant. Thomas Lang's son, something that might have been a smile crossed his face. "You remember?" "Barely." She studied him more carefully. Yes, there was something familiar in the shape of his face, though the boy she vaguely recalled had been perhaps 14 or 15, gangly and quiet. "You left town years ago." 8 years, he confirmed. "When my father died, I headed north, up into the high country. Been trapping mostly, living up in the Bradshaw Mountains." "Why are you here?" The question came out more harshly than she intended, but she had learned to be suspicious of everyone, especially men who seemed friendly. "I came to trade furs, get supplies, but I came looking for you too." "For me?" Disbelief colored her voice. "Why would you look for me?" Ethan Lang shifted his weight, and she noticed how carefully he moved, like someone accustomed to navigating dangerous terrain. "Your father helped mine when nobody else would. When Pa got sick with the lung fever, could not work no more, your father extended him credit at the store, let it go on for months without pressing. Brought food to our cabin. Your mother came too, brought soup, sat with Pa so I could hunt." He paused, his gray eyes holding hers. "They showed kindness when we were forgotten. I have not forgotten that." Zelda felt something crack in her chest, a painful thawing of ice she had built around herself. That was a long time ago. Some debts do not have a time on them. He glanced around the saloon with something like distaste. "Heard in town what happened to your family. Heard where I might find you. I wanted to see if you needed anything." The question was so absurd that for a moment she could only stare at him. Needed anything. She needed everything. Food that was not scraps, clothing without holes, a place to live that did not leak when it rained, respect, dignity, her family back, Her life returned. "I am managing," she said, the lie automatic. He looked at her for a long moment, and she had the uncomfortable sense that those gray eyes saw through her pretense, saw the exhaustion and hunger and desperation she tried to hide. "You look hungry." "I said I am managing. When did you last have a proper meal?" "I eat." "That is not what I asked." His voice was patient but firm, the tone of someone who would not be put off with evasions. Zelda felt heat rise to her face, shame mixing with anger. "What do you want from me? You want me to say it. Fine, I am hungry, I am always hungry. I have not had a proper meal since I can barely remember when." "There, are you satisfied? Does it make you feel good to hear it?" "No," he said quietly. "It makes me angry that nobody in this town has helped you." "Why should they? I am nobody to them. You are somebody to me. You are Zelda Anderson, daughter of Henry and Martha Anderson, sister to Tommy. I remember you." The sound of her family's name spoken aloud, spoken with respect and recognition, nearly undid her. She had not heard anyone say her mother's name in months, not since the anniversary of the deaths when the Reverend had mentioned them briefly in a prayer. She bit the inside of her cheek hard enough to taste blood, using pain to hold back tears. "Come with me," Ethan said. "Let me buy you dinner." "I am working." "Working for what? Pennies. Carver treats his horses better than his help. It is what I have. It does not have to be." He took a step closer and she caught the scent of pine and leather and wood smoke. "Please, let me do this one thing. Your family helped mine when we needed it. Let me return the kindness." Zelda wanted to refuse. Pride demanded it, what little pride she had left. But her stomach was hollow and cramping, and the thought of a real meal made her weak with longing. She had eaten only bread and a thin broth yesterday, the same the day before. "Just dinner," she said finally. "Then you go on your way and forget about me like everyone else." "I will not forget." He said it with such certainty that it startled her. "That is one thing you can count on, Zelda Anderson. I remember, and I do not forget." Dutch Carver complained when Zelda said she was leaving for the evening, but when Ethan turned those cold gray eyes on the saloon owner and said in a voice like distant thunder that she was done for today, Carver's objections died in his throat. There was something in Ethan Lang's presence that suggested arguing with him would be a poor decision. The restaurant was nothing fancy, just a small establishment that served beef and potatoes and vegetables to miners and tradesmen. But to Zelda, walking in on Ethan's arm, it felt impossibly grand. The proprietor, a woman named Mrs. Chen who had emigrated from San Francisco, showed them to a table without comment, though Zelda saw recognition in her eyes and wondered what she was thinking. Ethan ordered steak for both of them, with potatoes and beans and bread and coffee that came thick and black and hot. When the food arrived, Zelda had to force herself to eat slowly, to not fall on it like a starving animal. The steak was tender and rich, the potatoes were drowning in butter, the beans were seasoned with bacon. It was more food than she typically saw in 3 days. Ethan ate steadily but without hurry, and he watched her with those observant gray eyes. "When did you last have meat?" She swallowed a bite of steak before answering. "I do not remember. Weeks, maybe. And before you came here tonight, what did you eat today?" "Bread, some cheese." "Yesterday." "Does it matter?" "It matters to me." She set down her fork, her appetite suddenly warring with the emotions rising in her throat. "Why? Why do you care? You have been gone for years. You do not know me. We were never even friends. Why does any of this matter to you?" Ethan was quiet for a moment, his strong hands wrapped around his coffee cup. "When my father was dying, I was barely 16 years old. I did not know how to help him, did not know what to do. We had no money, no family, no help. I thought I would lose him and then be alone in the world." Your parents, they came to our cabin like it was the most natural thing. They did not ask for thanks or expect anything back. Your mother sat with Pa, read to him from the Bible, sang hymns. Your father brought medicine, food, firewood. You came too once. Do you remember? Zelda searched her memory. A cabin at the edge of town, dim and smoky inside. A man in a bed coughing, the sound wet and terrible. A boy with dark hair watching from the corner, his face tight with fear and helpless anger. I remember a little. You brought flowers, wildflowers you had picked. You put them in a jar by Pa's bed and told him they would help him feel better. You were maybe 13 years old. It was a small thing, probably nothing to you. But I remember thinking that you were the kindest person I had ever seen. She looked down at her plate, not knowing what to say. She had been a different person then, a girl who lived in a safe world where kindness came easily because she had never known true need. Pa died 2 weeks later, Ethan continued. I left town after the burial. Could not stand to stay in that cabin alone, could not stand the memories. I went north into the mountains and learned to survive. Learned to trap, to hunt, to live rough. Made a life up there where I did not need people. But I never forgot your family. Never forgot the kindness when we had nothing. He paused, his gaze steady on hers. I came back to Prescott to trade my winter's furs, sell them to the merchants, stock up on supplies before heading back into the high country. But I asked about your family. Wanted to see how you all were doing, maybe thank your folks properly now that I am grown and can speak the words better. Instead, I heard about the fever, heard that your parents and brother died, heard that you were left alone and that nobody helped you. People have their own troubles. That is an excuse, not a reason. His voice hardened. This town took everything from you and then pretended you did not exist. That is not right. Nothing about life is fair. No, but that does not mean we accept cruelty. He leaned forward, his muscular forearms resting on the table. Come with me. Zelda blinked. What? Come with me, leave this town, and go where? Into the mountains to live in a trapper's cabin. I know nothing about that life. I would die in a week. You would not die. I would teach you. I would take care of you. The certainty in his voice was absolute. You have nothing here but suffering and people who have turned their backs on you. You owe them nothing. Come north with me. Let me give you a better life than this. She stared at him, trying to comprehend what he was suggesting. You do not even know me, not really. I am not that girl with the flowers anymore. That girl is dead like my family. I know you have survived 3 years of hell that would have broken most people. I know you have kept going when you had every reason to give up. I know you scrub floors in a saloon when you should be living a life of comfort and respect. His gray eyes were fierce now, passionate in a way that made her breath catch. I know your name is Zelda Anderson and that you are not forgotten, not by me. The words struck something deep inside her, a place that had been numb and frozen. All those months of being invisible, of being treated like nothing, of having people look through her as though she did not exist. And here was this mountain man who remembered her name, who spoke it with respect and recognition, who saw her as a person rather than a problem to be avoided. I cannot just leave, she said, but the words were weak, the protest automatic rather than heartfelt. Why not? What holds you here? She opened her mouth to answer and realized she had nothing to say. No family, no friends, no home, no future. Just the grinding daily struggle to survive in a place that wanted to forget she existed. I have a debt to the boarding house, 3 weeks of back rent. I will pay it. I have nothing to bring with me, no proper clothes for mountain living. We will get what you need. I sold my furs this morning, have more than enough money. What if someone comes looking for me? They will think something happened to me. Ethan's expression turned skeptical. Will anyone in this town notice you are gone? The truth of that question hurt more than she wanted to admit. Who would notice? Dutch Carver would be annoyed that he had to find someone else to scrub his floors. The boarding house owner would be angry about the unpaid rent until Ethan settled it. But who would actually care that she was gone? Who would worry? Who would grieve? No, she said quietly. Nobody would notice. Then why stay? She looked down at her half-eaten steak, at the food that represented more abundance than she had known in months, provided by a man who owed her nothing but remembered a kindness from years ago. What did she have to lose? This was not a life. It was a slow death, a grinding away of everything she had been until nothing remained. "If I come with you," she said slowly, "I will not be your charity case. I will not be helpless. I will work. I will learn. I will earn my place. I would expect nothing less. And if it does not work, if I cannot manage mountain life, you will not abandon me somewhere to die. I would never abandon you. That is a promise." He reached across the table, his large hand palm up, an offering. "You have my word, Zelda Anderson. I will take care of you, teach you, and protect you. You will never be forgotten or invisible again." She looked at his hand, calloused and scarred from years of hard living, strong and steady. Then she looked at his face, at the honesty in those gray eyes, at the certainty in his expression. He meant every word. This man she barely knew, this mountain man who had walked out of her past, was offering her a way out of the prison her life had become. Slowly, she reached out and placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and secure, and she felt something she had not felt in years: hope. The next morning, Ethan paid off her debt to the boarding house while Zelda packed her few belongings into a bag that was mostly empty. She had little to take. 2 dresses, both worn and mended many times, a spare set of undergarments, a comb that had been her mother's, a small Bible that was falling apart, the pages loose from too many readings. That was all she owned in the world. Ethan took her to the general store and bought her proper clothes for mountain life. Heavy canvas pants like men wore, 2 flannel shirts, a thick wool coat, sturdy boots that would not fall apart in rough terrain, gloves, a hat. The store owner, Mr. Patterson, who had bought her father's inventory and never paid a fair price, watched with obvious disapproval. "Those are men's clothes," he said, as though Ethan might not have noticed. "She is going into the mountains. She needs clothes that will keep her warm and protected," Ethan replied, his tone leaving no room for discussion. "It is not proper for a woman to wear trousers." "I do not care about proper, I care about practical." Ethan pulled out a leather purse heavy with coins. "Are you selling or not?" Mr. Patterson's eyes fixed on the money and his objections evaporated. Of course, I will wrap these up." While he did that, Ethan added more items to the pile: a bedroll, a thick wool blanket, a tin cup, a plate, utensils, a good knife in a leather sheath. Practical items for survival. Zelda watched the stack grow, watched Ethan pay without hesitation, and felt a strange mixture of gratitude and guilt. She was not accustomed to anyone spending money on her, caring about her needs. When they left the store, Ethan's horse was tied outside, a large buckskin gelding with a calm temperament and intelligent eyes. Ethan loaded the supplies into saddlebags and tied the bedroll behind the saddle. Then he turned to Zelda. "Have you ridden before?" "Only a few times and never far." "You will be riding with me then, at least until we can get you your own horse." He swung up into the saddle with easy grace despite his size, then reached down for her. "Come on, put your foot in the stirrup and I will pull you up." Zelda did as he instructed, and his hand gripped her arm with careful strength, lifting her as though she weighed nothing. She settled in front of him, his arms coming around her to hold the reins, and she was suddenly very aware of his solid presence behind her, the warmth of him, the sense of protection he radiated. "Ready?" His voice was close to her ear, a low rumble. "Yes," she said, and was surprised to find she meant it. They rode out of Prescott with the morning sun warm on their faces. Zelda did not look back. There was nothing in that town she wanted to see again, no one she wanted to remember. Let them forget her completely. She was done with that life. The journey north took them into terrain that grew progressively wilder and more beautiful. They followed trails that wound through stands of ponderosa pine and Douglas fir, crossed streams that ran clear and cold from mountain snowmelt, climbed steadily into higher elevations where the air thinned and the views stretched for miles. Ethan rode with the confidence of someone who knew this land intimately, who had traveled these paths many times. They stopped at midday to rest the horse and eat. Ethan had packed jerky and hardtack, not fancy but filling. He showed Zelda how to find a good spot to stop, near water but with a clear view where they could see anyone approaching. He pointed out plants, naming them, explaining which were safe to eat and which to avoid. "Survival is about knowledge," he said, breaking a piece of jerky into smaller bits. "Knowing what the land offers, how to use it. The mountains will provide everything you need if you know how to look." "Were you scared when you first went into the wilderness alone?" she asked. He considered the question. "Terrified. I was 16, had never lived on my own, did not know half of what I needed to know. Made a lot of mistakes that first year. Nearly starved one winter because I had not stored enough food. Nearly got killed by a bear because I did not properly secure my supplies. Nearly froze because I built my shelter in a place that collected cold air." He smiled faintly. "But I learned. Pain is a good teacher, and the mountains are not forgiving of stupidity." "How did you survive?" "Met an old trapper named Gideon Ross. He found me half dead from cold, dragged me back to his cabin, and spent the winter teaching me everything he knew. How to trap, how to read weather, how to move through snow, how to respect the wilderness. He saved my life and gave me the skills to make a living." His expression grew somber. "He died 4 years ago, died in his sleep, peaceful. I buried him on a ridge where he could see the sunrise. I took over his cabin, his trap lines, kept living the life he taught me." "Do you ever get lonely?" "Sometimes," he admitted. "The silence can be hard. But I prefer being alone in the mountains to being surrounded by people who do not see you. At least in the wilderness, everything is honest. A wolf does not pretend to be your friend before it bites you." Zelda understood that sentiment completely. The betrayal of Prescott had not been violent or dramatic. It had been the slow, grinding realization that the people she thought cared about her had simply moved on, forgotten her, erased her from their lives as though she had never mattered. That kind of cruelty was worse than any wolf's teeth. They rode on through the afternoon. Ethan pointed out landmarks, teaching her to read the terrain. That distinctive rock formation meant they were on the right path. That particular type of tree grew only at certain elevations. That peak in the distance was their destination, where his cabin sat in a protected valley. As the sun began to sink toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, they climbed a final ridge, and Zelda saw the valley below. It was beautiful, a hidden pocket of land surrounded by mountains, with a stream running through it and meadows of tall grass dotted with wildflowers. At the edge of the tree line sat a cabin, small but solid-looking, built from logs chinked with mud and moss. "Home," Ethan said simply. They descended into the valley as twilight fell. The temperature dropped quickly at this elevation, and Zelda was grateful for the wool coat Ethan had bought her. By the time they reached the cabin, full darkness had arrived, bringing with it a canopy of stars more brilliant than she had ever seen. Ethan helped her down from the horse, then tended to the animal, removing the saddle and bridle, rubbing the gelding down, letting it drink from the stream before turning it into a small corral attached to the cabin. His movements were practiced and efficient, the routine of someone who had done this countless times. The cabin's interior was simple and masculine. One room with a stone fireplace on one wall, a bed in the corner, a table with 2 chairs, shelves holding supplies and equipment, furs hanging from hooks. But it was clean and well-maintained, everything in its place. Ethan lit a lantern and warm light filled the space. "It is not much," he said, sounding almost apologetic. "It is yours," Zelda replied. "That makes it more than I have had in years." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "You can have the bed. I will sleep by the fire." "Ethan, this is your home. I am not taking your bed." "You will take the bed," he said firmly. "You are my guest. Besides, I have spent years sleeping on the ground. A bedroll by the fire is luxury compared to most nights on the trap line." He built up the fire while Zelda stood awkwardly, not sure what to do with herself. This was all so strange, so different from anything she had known. She was in a cabin in the mountains with a man she barely remembered, having left behind everything familiar. It should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like exhaling after holding her breath for years. Ethan made a simple dinner of beans and bacon, with coffee boiled strong enough to strip paint. They ate sitting at the small table, the firelight casting dancing shadows on the log walls. Outside, she could hear the night sounds of the wilderness, the distant call of an owl, the rustle of wind through the pines, the eternal murmur of the stream. "Tomorrow I will start teaching you," Ethan said. "How to handle an axe, how to fish, how to shoot. Basic skills you will need." "Why are you doing this?" The question came out before she could stop it. "Really? I know you said my family helped yours, but that was years ago. You do not owe me this much." Ethan set down his coffee cup and looked at her with those steady gray eyes. "Because when my world fell apart, your family saw me. They remembered my name. They treated me like I mattered. And now you needed someone to remember you, to see you, to know your name when everyone else had forgotten. I could not let that stand. I could not walk away knowing you were suffering when I had the means to help. You could have just given me money. Money would not have solved the real problem. You needed to leave that place, to get away from the people who had failed you. You needed a chance to start over somewhere you could breathe." He paused. "And maybe I needed someone here too. Maybe I was tired of being alone." The admission surprised her. He seemed so self-sufficient, so comfortable in his solitude. But perhaps everyone needed connection, even mountain men who had fled civilization. "I will try my best to learn," she said. "I will not be a burden." "You are not a burden, Zelda. You are welcome here." That night, lying in Ethan's bed while he slept by the fire, Zelda stared at the ceiling and listened to the sounds of the wilderness. For the first time in 3 years, she felt safe, protected, remembered. A man she barely knew had given her back something she thought lost forever: her name, her dignity, her hope. The days that followed established a rhythm that Zelda found both exhausting and exhilarating. Ethan was a patient but demanding teacher, showing her skills that seemed impossible at first but gradually became manageable with practice. He taught her to swing an axe properly, how to let the weight of the tool do the work rather than forcing it. Her hands blistered at first, then calloused. Her arms and shoulders ached from muscles being used in new ways. But she persisted, and by the end of the first week, she could split firewood with reasonable efficiency. He taught her to fish in the stream, showing her how to read the water, where trout liked to hide, how to cast a line, how to be patient. The first fish she caught was small, barely worth cleaning, but the pride she felt when she landed it was outsized. Ethan grinned at her excitement, and she realized it was the first time she had smiled, really smiled in longer than she could remember. He taught her to shoot, starting with tin cans lined up on a fallen log. The rifle's kick surprised her the first time, knocking her back a step. But Ethan stood behind her, his hands steadying her arms, his voice calm as he corrected her stance, her grip, her breathing. After dozens of attempts, she finally hit a can, the metallic ping satisfying beyond words. "Good," Ethan said, and the simple praise warmed her more than it should have. He taught her to move quietly through the forest, to watch where she stepped, to read tracks in the soft earth. Deer had passed this way. A fox had hunted here. That scrape on the tree was from a bear marking territory, and they should be cautious. The wilderness was full of signs if you knew how to read them. He taught her to identify edible plants, to tell the difference between berries that would nourish and berries that would sicken. How to find wild onions, which mushrooms were safe, where to dig for roots. The mountains were not barren but abundant if you had knowledge. At night, they sat by the fire and talked. Ethan told her stories of his years in the wilderness, the things he had seen, the dangers he had faced, the beauty he had discovered. She told him about her childhood in Prescott, the happy years before the fever, memories she had locked away because they hurt too much to examine. Talking about them with Ethan, in this place far from where everything had fallen apart, made them bearable again. "Your mother played piano?" he asked one evening, beautifully. She could play anything, even if she had only heard it once. People would request songs at church and she would just play them. Zelda smiled at the memory. "She tried to teach me, but I was terrible. No rhythm. My father used to joke that I could make a piano sound like cats fighting." Ethan laughed, a deep rumbling sound that filled the cabin. "I am sure you were not that bad." "I was. Even Tommy, who was only 8, played better than me. He had talent." Her smile faded. "He would have been good at music if he had lived to grow up." "I am sorry you lost them." "Me too." She stared into the fire. "Sometimes I am angry at them for leaving me. I know that is not fair. They did not choose to die, but I am angry anyway." "Anger is normal. You can love someone and still be angry they are gone." "Were you angry when your father died?" "Yes. Furious. At him for dying, at the world for being cruel, at God for letting it happen, at myself for not being able to save him." Ethan poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. "That anger is what drove me into the mountains. I wanted to get away from everything that reminded me of loss. Took me a long time to realize you cannot outrun grief. You just have to carry it until it gets lighter." "Has it gotten lighter for you?" "Some. Time helps. So does purpose. So does finding reasons to keep going." He looked at her across the fire. "So does not being alone." The way he said it, the way he looked at her, made something flutter in Zelda's chest. She looked away, suddenly shy, and changed the subject to something safer. But she thought about his words later that night, lying in the bed that smelled of pine and wood smoke and something distinctly masculine. She thought about Ethan, about his kindness and patience, about the way he looked at her like she mattered, like she was visible and real and important. She thought about how safe she felt in his presence, how protected, how seen. She thought about how his arms had felt around her when they rode together, solid and strong. How his hands had steadied her when she learned to shoot, his touch careful and respectful. How his smile transformed his rugged face into something approaching handsome, maybe even beautiful in a fierce, wild way. She was noticing him as a man, not just as her rescuer. And that realization was both thrilling and terrifying. Summer deepened into its full glory. The days were long and warm, the nights cool but comfortable. Zelda's body changed, becoming stronger, more capable. The hollow look left her face as she ate regular meals. Color returned to her cheeks. The constant exhaustion faded, replaced by a healthy tiredness from physical work that felt satisfying rather than defeating. She learned to tend the garden Ethan kept behind the cabin, a plot where he grew potatoes, carrots, beans, and squash. She learned to preserve food for winter, drying meat into jerky, storing root vegetables in the cool cellar beneath the cabin, smoking fish. She learned to tan hides, messy and difficult work that made her gag at first, but that produced leather they could use for clothing and repairs. Ethan bought her a horse from a trader who passed through the valley, a gentle mare with a black coat and white socks on her front feet. He taught Zelda to ride properly, to care for the animal, to communicate with it. They named her Shadow, and Zelda loved that horse with a fierce protectiveness that surprised her. They rode together through the mountains, Ethan showing her the land he knew so intimately. Secret valleys where elk grazed, alpine lakes so clear you could see the bottom 20 feet down. Meadows carpeted with wildflowers in colors that seemed impossible. Ridges where you could see for 100 miles. The wilderness that had seemed frightening at first revealed itself as magnificent. One afternoon in late July, they rode to a high mountain lake for a picnic. The water was impossibly blue, reflecting the sky and surrounding peaks. They ate bread and cheese and dried apples, sitting on sun-warmed rocks, and Zelda felt a contentment she had forgotten was possible. "Thank you," she said suddenly. Ethan looked over at her. "For what?" "For everything. For remembering me, for giving me this." She gestured at the mountains, the lake, the vast beauty surrounding them. "I was dying in Prescott. Maybe not physically, not yet, but everything that mattered was dying. You saved me. You saved yourself. I just gave you a place to do it." "No, you gave me much more than that." She turned to face him fully. "You gave me back my name. You made me feel like a person again, not just a ghost people wanted to forget. I do not think I can ever repay that." "I do not want repayment, Zelda. I want you to be happy. That is enough." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and then Ethan said, "Can I tell you something?" "Of course." "I have been alone for 8 years. By choice, mostly. I told myself I preferred the solitude, that I was better off without people, and maybe that was true for a while. But having you here, it has made me realize how lonely I actually was, how much I was missing." He picked up a small stone and tossed it into the lake, watching the ripples spread. "You being here has made this place feel different, better, like a home instead of just a shelter." Zelda's heart was beating faster. "Ethan, I am not good with words," he continued, his voice rough. "I spend too much time with trees and animals, but I need you to know that you are not a burden or a charity case or someone I helped out of obligation. You are someone I want here. Someone who matters to me. You matter to me too," she said quietly. "More than I expected, more than I know how to say." He turned to look at her then, and the intensity in those gray eyes made her breath catch. "I remember you as that kind girl who brought flowers to a dying man. But I am coming to know you as the strong woman who survived hell and kept her decency. Who learned to split wood and shoot straight and ride a horse when she had never done those things. Who smiles when she catches a fish and laughs when she falls in the creek. Who is beautiful and brave and more than I deserve. You deserve everything good," Zelda said, her voice thick with emotion. "You are the best man I have ever known." "Zelda." Her name on his lips was a prayer and a question. She closed the distance between them, moving on instinct and need and feelings that had been growing since the day he had spoken her name in that saloon. She kissed him, tentative at first, then with more certainty when his arms came around her, pulling her close against his solid chest. He kissed her back with a tenderness that belied his rough appearance, one large hand cradling the back of her head, the other steady on her waist. He tasted of mountain air and coffee, and something uniquely him. The kiss deepened, and Zelda felt heat unfurl in her belly, desire mixing with affection and trust and something deeper that she was not quite ready to name. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing harder, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that for weeks." "Why did you not?" "Because I did not want you to feel obligated. You are living in my cabin, eating my food, depending on me. I did not want you to think you owed me anything, including affection." "You fool," she said, but there was no heat in it. "I do not kiss out of obligation. No, no. I kiss because I wanted to, because I have feelings for you that have nothing to do with gratitude or debt." She pulled back enough to look into his eyes. "I care about you, Ethan Lang, truly care about you, not because you saved me, but because of who you are." His smile was brilliant, transforming his face. "I care about you too, more than care if I am being honest." "What more?" "I think I am falling in love with you, Zelda Anderson." The words should have frightened her. She had known him barely 2 months. But instead they felt right, like something she had been waiting to hear without knowing it. "I think I am falling in love with you too," she whispered. He kissed her again, and this time there was nothing tentative about it. This was a claiming, a promise, a beginning. When they finally made their way back to the cabin, riding side by side as the sun set behind the mountains, everything had changed between them. They were no longer rescuer and rescued, host and guest. They were something more, something with potential that made Zelda's heart sing. That night, Ethan did not sleep by the fire. He climbed into bed beside Zelda, holding her close, her back pressed against his chest, his arm draped protectively over her waist. They did not make love, not yet. There was time for that, and both of them knew it. For now, it was enough to be held, to feel wanted and cherished, to fall asleep in the arms of someone who knew your name and would never forget it. August brought afternoon thunderstorms that rolled through the mountains with dramatic fury. Lightning split the sky, thunder echoed off the peaks, and rain fell in sheets that turned the meadows into temporary lakes. Zelda learned to read the weather, to see the signs of an approaching storm, to get herself and the animals to shelter before it hit. She and Ethan settled into a new rhythm, one that included stolen kisses and lingering touches, long conversations that stretched into the night, and a growing intimacy that felt both natural and thrilling. They were learning each other, discovering preferences and quirks, building something together. Ethan taught her to ride better, taking her on longer expeditions into the wilderness. They checked his trap lines together, though he had fewer set during summer. He showed her where he had buried his mentor, that ridge where the sunrise was spectacular, and told her stories about old Gideon that made her wish she had known the man. They hunted together, and Zelda shot her first deer, a clean kill that made her both proud and sad. She helped Ethan butcher the animal, learning to value the meat that would feed them, to tan the hide that would provide leather, to waste nothing. The work was hard and bloody, but she understood the necessity of it, the cycle of life and death that ruled the wilderness. One evening, as they sat by the fire after a day spent cutting and stacking firewood for winter, Ethan said, "I have been thinking." "About what?" "About the future. About what happens when summer ends and autumn comes." Zelda's stomach tightened with sudden anxiety. "What about it?" "Winter in the mountains is harsh, beautiful but brutal. Temperatures drop below zero. Snow can get 6 feet deep or more. We would be snowed in for months, just the two of us, with no way to get to town and no visitors coming through." He looked at her seriously. "I want you to stay. I want you here all winter and beyond. But you need to understand what you are agreeing to." "I understand isolation. This is different from being lonely in a town. This is being cut off completely. If something goes wrong, there is no help coming. If we run short on supplies, we cannot just go buy more. If we fight, There is no walking away to cool off because there is nowhere to go. He took her hand in his. I am asking you to commit to this life to me, knowing it will be hard sometimes. Zelda thought about Prescott, about the life she had left behind. She thought about scrubbing floors in the saloon, sleeping in that tiny room, being invisible and forgotten. She thought about the loneliness of being surrounded by people who did not see her. Then she thought about the past 2 months. The work had been hard, yes, but satisfying. She had learned skills that made her feel capable and strong. She had eaten well, slept soundly, laughed often. She had fallen in love with a man who treated her with respect and tenderness, who valued her presence, who would never forget her name. I do not want to go back, she said. I want to stay here with you, not just for winter, but for always. Always is a long time, not long enough. She squeezed his hand. I love you, Ethan. I want to build a life with you. I want to face whatever comes, hard or easy, together. He pulled her into his lap, holding her close. I love you too. I want you to be my wife if you will have me. I know I am not much. I live in a cabin in the middle of nowhere. I can offer you work and danger and long winters, but I can also offer you a home where you are valued, respect, protection, and all the love I have. Yes, she said without hesitation. Yes, I will marry you. They were married in late August by a traveling preacher who came through the valley on his circuit. The ceremony was simple, held outside the cabin with wildflowers that Zelda had picked decorating the doorway. Ethan wore his best shirt, and Zelda wore a dress she had sewn herself from fabric Ethan had bought on his last trip to trade. There were no guests, no witnesses except the preacher and the mountains and the endless sky. But when Ethan slipped a simple gold band on her finger, a ring that had belonged to his mother, and kissed her as his wife, Zelda felt happier than she had ever been. They celebrated with a dinner of venison stew and bread, with berries and cream for dessert, and whiskey that Ethan had been saving for a special occasion. Then the preacher left, heading to his next destination, and Ethan and Zelda were alone again. That night, they consummated their marriage in the cabin that was now truly their home. Ethan was gentle and patient, aware that Zelda had no experience. He took his time, making sure she felt pleasure as well as he did, and when they finally joined together completely, it felt like the most natural and right thing in the world. Afterward, they lay tangled together, skin to skin, the firelight painting their bodies in gold. Ethan traced patterns on Zelda's bare shoulder, and she rested her head against his muscular chest, listening to his heartbeat. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For remembering me when everyone else forgot, for saying my name, for giving me a reason to keep living. Thank you for trusting me, for coming here, for giving me a reason to live too." He kissed the top of her head. "I never thought I would have this. A wife, a partner, someone to share this life with. You are a gift I do not deserve but will treasure every day." "We deserve each other," Zelda said firmly. "We have both survived loss and loneliness. We have earned happiness. Then let us be happy together." And they were. September brought the first signs of autumn. The aspens turned gold, brilliant against the dark green of the pines. The air grew cooler, especially at night. The animals began preparing for winter, squirrels hoarding nuts, bears feeding heavily before hibernation. Ethan and Zelda worked hard to make sure they were ready too. They hunted and put up meat. They harvested the garden and stored vegetables. They gathered firewood until they had a massive stack along the cabin's north wall. They checked the cabin's chinking, repairing any gaps where cold air might enter. They brought in the pelts and furs Ethan had stored, preparing to make warmer clothes and blankets. Zelda learned to make soap, to render fat, to preserve food in different ways. She learned to sew using sinew as thread, to patch clothes and make new ones. Her hands were no longer soft but work-hardened, and she took pride in their capability. She also discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, her monthly courses failing to arrive, her breasts tender, strange waves of nausea hitting her in the mornings. But she waited to be certain before telling Ethan. When she was sure, she chose an evening when they were sitting by the fire, Ethan mending a harness while she worked on sewing a new shirt. "Ethan," she said, her heart pounding, "I have something to tell you." He looked up from his work. "What is it?" "I am with child." For a moment he just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then a smile spread across his face, so wide and joyful that it made her laugh. He dropped the harness and crossed to her, pulling her into his arms. "A baby." His voice was full of wonder. "We are going to have a baby." "Yes. I think I am about 2 months along. The baby should come in spring. A spring baby." He pulled back to look at her face, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Are you happy about this?" "I am. Are you?" "Happier than I can say." He placed a large hand on her still flat belly. "A child, our child." "I never dared dream of something like this. We are going to be parents. You are going to be a wonderful mother. You are going to be a wonderful father. I have seen how patient and kind you are, how you teach and protect. Our child will be lucky to have you." That night, they talked about the future in concrete terms. About raising a child in the mountains, teaching them to respect the wilderness and survive in it. About the challenges and the joys. About names, though they agreed it was too early to decide. About how their lives would change, the responsibility they were taking on. "Are you worried?" Ethan asked. "About giving birth out here, away from doctors and midwives?" "A little," Zelda admitted. "But women have been having babies in difficult circumstances since the beginning of time." "We will manage. I will make sure you have everything you need. When winter breaks and travel is possible again, I will go to the closest settlement, find women who have experience with birthing, bring back supplies. We will prepare the best we can and trust in God for the rest." "I will keep you safe," Ethan promised. "Both of you." Winter arrived in earnest in November. The first big snow came overnight and they woke to a world transformed, everything draped in white. The temperature plummeted and the work of survival became more difficult. They had to dig paths from the cabin to the corral, to the woodpile, to the creek where they broke through ice to get water. The horses required constant care, needing to be fed hay that Ethan had stored, needing shelter from the worst storms. The chickens Ethan kept huddled in their coop, laying fewer eggs in the cold. Everything took longer, required more effort. But inside the cabin, they were warm and comfortable. The fire burned constantly, fed with the wood they had worked so hard to stockpile. They had food enough to last until spring, and Zelda cooked hearty stews and soups, baked bread, rationed their supplies carefully. The cabin was cozy, insulated by the snow piled against its walls. They developed routines for the long winter days. Morning chores, taking care of animals and bringing in wood. Midday meals. Afternoons spent on maintenance tasks, repairing equipment, making clothes, working on projects. Evenings by the fire, talking, reading aloud from the few books Ethan owned, playing cards, simply being together. Zelda's belly grew slowly but steadily. By midwinter, the swell was obvious, and Ethan delighted in feeling the baby move. He talked to her stomach, telling their unborn child about the mountains, about the animals, about the life they would share. He was attentive to Zelda's needs, making sure she did not overwork herself, insisting she rest when she was tired. They were snowed in for months, just as Ethan had warned. There were no visitors, no contact with the outside world. Some days the isolation felt heavy, especially when storms raged outside and they were trapped inside the cabin. But mostly it felt right. They were their own world, complete and sufficient. In February, during a brief clear period, Ethan snowshoed down the mountain to a trading post 2 days away. He came back with cloth for making baby clothes, with medicines and supplies, with news from the outside world that seemed distant and unimportant. President Grant, someone named Hayes running for election, conflicts with various Indian tribes, a scandal involving railroads. None of it touched their life in the mountains. March brought the first signs of spring. The days grew longer, the sun stronger. Snow began to melt and the trickle of the creek became a roar. Ice broke up and the valley started to emerge from its white covering, patches of brown earth appearing, then hints of green. Zelda's belly was huge now, and she moved carefully, her back aching, her feet swollen. But she was healthy and strong, and when the baby kicked vigorously, she laughed at the sensation. They had decided on names. Ethan Thomas if it was a boy, after Ethan and Zelda's father Henry's middle name. Martha Ann if it was a girl, after Zelda's mother. In early April, as the valley bloomed with new life, Zelda went into labor. It started in the morning with a dull ache in her back that gradually intensified. By afternoon, the contractions were coming regularly, and there was no doubt about what was happening. Ethan, who had faced down bears and blizzards without flinching, looked terrified. "What do I do?" he asked. "Boil water, get clean cloths, stay calm." Zelda tried to sound confident, but she was scared too. This was completely new territory, and despite all the preparation, the reality of it was overwhelming. The labor progressed through the afternoon and into the evening. Ethan stayed with her, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool cloths, encouraging her. The pain was intense, waves that built and crested and left her gasping. But between contractions, she focused on Ethan's face, on his strength and presence, and found courage. As night fell and the cabin was lit only by firelight, Zelda felt the overwhelming urge to push. Ethan, following instincts and the vague instructions he had gotten from women at the trading post, helped position her, supported her, and told her she was strong, she could do this, he was there. And she did it. With a final tremendous effort, their baby slid into the world and Ethan caught the infant with shaking hands. A cry filled the cabin, strong and outraged, and both of them started laughing and crying at the same time. "A boy," Ethan said, his voice choked with emotion. "We have a son." He cleaned the baby with gentle hands, wrapped him in soft cloth, and placed him in Zelda's arms. She looked down at the tiny red face, the dark hair, the perfect little fingers that gripped hers, and felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. "Ethan Thomas Lang," she whispered. "Hello, little one, we have been waiting for you." Ethan knelt beside the bed, his large hand covering both Zelda's and the baby's. His face was wet with tears, his expression one of complete awe. "You were so brave. You were incredible. We did it together. I love you, both of you." More than words can say. They spent that night marveling at their son, at his tiny perfection, at the miracle of his existence. Ethan was careful and tender, holding the baby like he was made of glass, his usually confident hands uncertain with this precious burden. Zelda nursed their son, feeling the strange pull and connection, the ancient bond between mother and child. As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, the three of them were a family, complete, whole, loved. The months that followed were exhausting and wonderful. The baby, called Thomas by both of them, was healthy and hungry and loud when he wanted something. Zelda recovered from the birth, her body slowly returning to normal, though she would never be quite the same. Ethan was a devoted father, taking on tasks with the baby without complaint. He walked the floor with Thomas when the infant was fussy. He changed dirty cloths without hesitation. He watched over mother and child with fierce protectiveness. Seeing this large, rough mountain man being so gentle with a tiny baby made Zelda fall in love with him all over again. Spring turned to summer, and they established new routines that accommodated a child. Thomas went everywhere with them, carried in a sling Zelda had made, sleeping in a cradle Ethan had carved from wood. He was surrounded by wilderness from his first days, exposed to the sounds of the forest, the sight of mountains, the clean scent of pine. In June, Ethan made a trip down to the nearest town to sell furs and buy supplies. He came back with news that the United States was celebrating its centennial, 100 years as a nation. There had been a big exposition in Philadelphia with exhibits from around the world, new inventions and technologies on display. It seemed impossible that such things existed in the same world as their quiet valley. "Does it ever make you sad?" Zelda asked that evening as they sat outside the cabin, watching Thomas sleep in his cradle, the sunset glorious above the mountains. Missing out on all those things. The progress and excitement, Ethan considered the question. "Sometimes I am curious, but I do not feel like I am missing anything important. I have what matters. You, our son, this life we have built, the rest is just noise." I feel the same way. I should want to be part of civilization, part of society, but I have no desire to go back to that world. This is enough. This is everything. He took her hand, their fingers intertwining. "I am glad you came north with me that day. I am glad you trusted me. I am glad you remembered my name when everyone else forgot." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, bright and uncountable in the vast sky. Their son slept peacefully, and the valley was quiet except for the eternal murmur of the creek and the whisper of wind through the pines. Zelda thought about the girl she had been, forgotten and invisible in Prescott, and could barely recognize her now. She had been remade by wilderness and love, by hardship and purpose. She was stronger now, capable, valued. She was a wife, a mother, a partner in a life that was difficult but rich with meaning, and she had Ethan, who had walked into her darkest moment and offered light, who had remembered her name when she was in danger of disappearing completely, who loved her with a steadiness that was as reliable as the mountains themselves. Years passed in their valley. Thomas grew into a sturdy boy with his father's gray eyes and his mother's determination. He learned to walk on uneven mountain terrain, learned his letters from the Bible, learned to ride almost as soon as he could walk. He was a child of the wilderness, comfortable in a world that would terrify most people raised in civilization. When Thomas was 3, Zelda became pregnant again. This time, the birth was easier, faster, and resulted in a daughter they named Martha Ann, called Annie. She had Zelda's dark hair and Ethan's strong build, and from the start she was fearless, crawling toward anything that interested her without concern for danger. 2 years after Annie came another son, Henry James, called James. He was quieter than his siblings, more thoughtful, with a gift for observation that reminded Ethan of old Gideon. The cabin had to be expanded to accommodate the growing family. Ethan built an addition, creating a separate room for the children, a larger living space, a proper root cellar. The work was hard but satisfying, and Zelda helped where she could, learning carpentry alongside everything else she had mastered. They were not completely isolated. Other trappers and hunters passed through occasionally, stopping to trade news and supplies. A few families had settled in other valleys in the mountains, and they would visit once or twice a year, giving the children playmates and Zelda other women to talk with. But mostly they were self-sufficient, their own complete world. Ethan taught his sons to trap and hunt, to read the wilderness, to survive on their own. Zelda taught her daughter to cook and sew, to identify plants, to be strong and capable. Both parents taught all their children to read, to think, to question, to respect the land that sustained them. In 1882, when Thomas was 6 and Annie was 3 and James was just learning to walk, a circuit preacher stopped at their cabin. He was the same man who had married Zelda and Ethan years before, and he was delighted to see how they had flourished. Over dinner that evening, he said, "I have married dozens of couples over the years, and I always wonder how they fare, whether love endures or fades, whether they find happiness or just settle for contentment." "And what do you see here?" Ethan asked. The preacher smiled. "I see a family that has built something real. I see love that has deepened rather than diminished. I see children who are being raised with care and values. I see two people who chose each other and keep choosing each other every day." He looked at Zelda. "I remember you seemed hesitant when I first came here, uncertain if you were making the right choice. Are you still uncertain?" "Not for a moment," Zelda said firmly. "This is exactly where I am meant to be." That night, after the children were asleep and the preacher had retired to the guest corner Ethan had built, Zelda and Ethan sat outside under the stars, as they had done countless times before. "You ever think about Prescott?" Ethan asked. "About the people there?" "Sometimes," Zelda admitted. "I wonder if anyone ever thinks about me, if they remember I existed, if they feel any guilt about how they treated me. Does it matter?" She thought about that. Did it matter? Those people had forgotten her, erased her from their lives, treated her as invisible. But their forgetting had led her here, to this life, to Ethan, to their children, to a richness she never could have imagined. "No," she said finally. "It does not matter. They forgot me, but you remembered. They turned away, but you saw me. They erased my name, but you spoke it with respect. One person remembering matters more than a whole town forgetting." "I will always remember," Ethan said, pulling her close. "I will always say your name, Zelda Lang. I will always see you. And I will always love you for it." They sat together until the cold drove them inside, wrapped in blankets and each other, watching the stars wheel overhead. The wilderness was silent except for its eternal sounds, the creek and the wind and the distant call of an owl. Their children slept safely, and the fire burned warm, and their life together stretched ahead with promise and purpose. Zelda had been forgotten by everyone who once loved her, but Ethan had remembered her name and never forgot. That remembering had saved her, had given her a life beyond her wildest dreams, had made her into someone she was proud to be. And that, she thought as she drifted toward sleep in her husband's arms, was worth more than all the belonging and acceptance she had lost. One person's faithful remembering was worth an entire town's forgetting. She was loved. She was valued. She was seen. She was home. The years continued their steady march, bringing changes and growth to the Lang family. By 1885, the cabin had been expanded twice more, and the valley rang with the sounds of children's laughter and play. Thomas was 9 now, tall for his age and showing signs of developing his father's broad shoulders. He could shoot straight, ride well, and track animals through the forest with impressive skill. Annie was 6, fearless and adventurous, always climbing trees she was too small for or trying to catch fish with her bare hands. She had a will of iron and a heart full of curiosity. James was 4, thoughtful and gentle, more interested in watching clouds than hunting, but sharp as a tack and already reading better than his older siblings at his age. In the spring of that year, Zelda gave birth to twins, a girl and a boy they named Caroline Grace and Robert Thomas. The double blessing was both joyful and exhausting, and Zelda thanked God daily for Ethan's help and the assistance of their older children, who doted on the babies with protective affection. The cabin was crowded but full of love. Every evening, after the endless tasks of survival were completed, the family gathered around the fire. Ethan would tell stories of his early days in the wilderness, or Zelda would read from the Bible or the few books they owned. The children would act out tales or play quiet games until exhaustion claimed them. Ethan had become something of a legend among the scattered mountain families. He was the man to call on when trouble arose, when a bear was threatening livestock, or a family needed help building a cabin or someone was lost in the wilderness. His strength and skills were matched by his generosity and kindness, traits he had learned from Zelda's father years ago. Zelda had developed her own reputation as a healer and midwife. She had helped deliver babies for 3 different families, drawing on her own experiences and instincts. She knew which herbs helped with fever, which poultices drew out infection, how to set a broken bone, how to treat burns and cuts. Women sought her advice, and she gave it freely, remembering what it was like to need help and receive none. Their children grew up understanding the value of community, of helping others, of remembering kindness and returning it. They understood that survival in the wilderness required not just skill but cooperation and compassion. In the summer of 1888, when Thomas was 12, he asked his father about the world beyond the mountains. "Will I ever see a city? Will I go to school with other children? Will I learn things you cannot teach me?" Ethan and Zelda discussed it seriously that night after the children were asleep. They had known this question would come eventually. Their children were bright and curious, and while they were teaching them everything they could, there were limits to what they could provide. "What do you think?" Ethan asked. "I think we cannot keep them isolated forever," Zelda said slowly. "They should have choices we did not have. They should be able to decide if they want this life or a different one. You would let them go, if that is what they choose, yes. We cannot trap them here no matter how much we love this place." She reached for his hand. "But we can raise them to understand what matters. Love, loyalty, kindness, remembering. If they have those things, they will be fine wherever they go." The next day, Ethan sat down with Thomas. "You asked about the outside world. Here is what I can offer. When you are 14, old enough to handle yourself, I will take you on a trip. We will go to Denver, see a real city. You can decide then if you want more of that world or if you want to come back here." Thomas's eyes lit up. "Really, really. But until then, you work hard, you learn everything you can, and you help your mother with your siblings. Understand?" "Yes, sir. I understand." Over the next 2 years, Thomas devoted himself to learning with new intensity. He absorbed every lesson, practiced every skill, prepared himself for the wider world he would soon encounter. And when he turned 14 in April of 1890, Ethan made good on his promise. Father and son set out on horseback, heading east and south toward Denver. It was a journey of several weeks, through mountains and plains, past small settlements and through wilderness. Ethan used the time to teach Thomas about navigating unfamiliar territory, about dealing with strangers, about the dangers of civilization that were different from the dangers of nature. Denver in 1890 was a booming city, full of brick buildings and paved streets, electric lights and streetcars, crowds and noise and energy. Thomas was overwhelmed at first, stunned by the sheer number of people, by the sounds and smells and sights so different from the quiet mountains. They stayed for 2 weeks, and Ethan showed his son everything. Museums and libraries, schools and churches, stores full of goods from around the world, restaurants serving food they had never tasted. They went to a theater and saw a play, and Thomas sat transfixed, watching actors bring stories to life on stage. But Ethan also showed him the other side of city life. The poverty and crime, The way people looked through each other as though they were invisible. The loneliness possible even in crowds. He took Thomas to a place not unlike where Zelda had worked in Prescott, where desperate people did desperate things to survive. "This is what your mother escaped," Ethan said. "This is what happens when people forget each other's names, when they stop seeing each other as human." On their last night in Denver, Ethan asked Thomas what he thought. "It is exciting," Thomas said honestly. "There are things here I never imagined. Opportunities and learning and experiences. But—" He trailed off, looking out the window of their hotel room at the electric lights glowing in the darkness. "But it also feels lonely. All these people, and nobody really knows each other. Nobody looks at each other. It is like everyone is alone together." "You want to stay, go to school here, learn a trade?" Thomas shook his head slowly. "No, I want to go home. I want to see Annie and James and the twins. I want to hear the creek and smell the pines. I want to see Ma's smile and sleep in my own bed." He looked at his father. "I am glad I came. I am glad I saw this, but I know where I belong now." Ethan felt pride and relief in equal measure. "Then let us go home." They arrived back at the cabin in late May, and the entire family poured out to greet them. Annie threw herself at Thomas, demanding to hear about everything. James wanted to know if Thomas had seen trains and tall buildings. The twins, now 3 years old, just clung to their father's legs, happy to have him back. That night, with everyone finally settled, Zelda lay beside Ethan in their bed. How was he? Amazed by the city. Overwhelmed, curious about everything. Ethan smiled in the darkness. "And clear that he wants to come home, that this is where he belongs." "Good. I am glad he had the chance to choose. He asked me something on the way back. He asked me to tell him how we met, how we got together, so I told him everything. About your family helping mine. About the fever and how the town turned on you. About finding you in that saloon and bringing you here." Ethan pulled her closer. He said he was proud to have parents who remember kindness and return it, who see people when others look away. Zelda felt tears prick her eyes. "He is a good boy." "He is. They all are. We are raising them right." Over the following years, each of their children reached the age of decision. Annie went with Ethan to Denver when she was 14 and came back even more certain than Thomas that the mountains were her home. James went and was fascinated by the libraries and universities, but ultimately chose to return, determined to build his own cabin in a nearby valley when he was old enough. The twins, when their turn came, were equally certain. Caroline wanted to be like her mother, a healer and helper. Robert wanted to be a mountain man like his father, living close to the land. By 1900, the Lang family had become an institution in the mountain communities. Thomas, at 24, had married a girl from another trapping family and built his own cabin a few miles from his parents. Annie, at 21, was courting a young man who had come west from St. Louis seeking adventure and found it in a fearless mountain woman. James, at 19, was planning to marry and establish his own homestead. Zelda was 45 now, her dark hair threaded with silver, her face lined from years of sun and wind. But she was healthy and strong, and she had never been happier. She looked at the life she had built, the family she had raised, the community she was part of, and felt nothing but gratitude. One evening in June, as she and Ethan sat outside watching the sunset, she said, "Do you remember the first day we met? In that saloon?" "I remember everything about that day. How you looked thin and tired. How your hands were raw from scrubbing. How you seemed like you had forgotten how to hope." I was existing, not living. And then you said my name." She turned to look at him, this man who had saved her in every way that mattered. "You remembered me when I had been forgotten. You gave me back my name and my dignity and my future." You gave me a reason to live for something beyond just survival, he replied. Before you, I was alone in the wilderness. After you, I had a home, a partner, a purpose. You saved me too, Zelda. We saved each other. Yes, we did. They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands, watching their valley settle into evening. Their grandchildren would be born soon, Thomas's wife expecting their first child any day. The cycle continued, life renewing itself, family extending into the future. Zelda thought about the girl she had been, forgotten and invisible. She thought about the people of Prescott who had turned away from her, who had erased her from their lives. She wondered if any of them ever thought about her, ever felt regret for their cruelty. But it did not matter anymore. That girl was gone, transformed into this woman who was loved and valued and essential. That life was over, replaced by this one full of purpose and connection. She had been forgotten by everyone who once loved her. But Ethan had remembered her name and never forgot. That single act of remembering had changed everything, had given her a life beyond her wildest dreams. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what? For remembering me. For saying my name. For never forgetting." Ethan lifted her hand to his lips, kissing it gently. "I could never forget you, Zelda Lang. You are written on my heart. You always will be." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Zelda leaned against her husband and smiled. She had been forgotten, yes, but she had also been remembered. And being remembered by the right person, being seen and valued and loved by someone who would never turn away, was worth more than all the belongings she had lost. She was home. She was loved. She was remembered, and that was everything. The years flowed like the creek through their valley, steady and sure. Thomas and his wife Sarah had 3 children, sturdy mountain kids who called Ethan Grandpa Bear because of his size and strength. Annie married her young man, David, and they built a cabin on the other side of the valley, close enough to visit but far enough for independence. James married a quiet woman named Elizabeth, who loved books as much as he did, and their cabin became known for having the best collection of reading material in the mountain communities. The twins, Caroline and Robert, both in their 20s now, remained unmarried but content, helping their parents, serving the scattered families in the mountains with healing and guidance. In 1905, as Zelda turned 50 and Ethan 54, they found themselves grandparents many times over, the cabin often full of visiting children and grandchildren, loud with laughter and stories and the beautiful chaos of family. One afternoon in late summer, Zelda was working in her garden when she heard horses approaching. She straightened, shading her eyes, and saw a group of riders coming up the valley trail. Visitors were not uncommon, but something about these riders felt different, purposeful. As they drew closer, Zelda recognized the lead rider as John Porter, one of the traders who came through regularly. But the people with him were strangers, a man and woman in their 50s, dressed in city clothes that were dusty from travel. "Mrs. Lang," John called as they approached. "Got some folks here looking for you. They came all the way from Prescott." Zelda's heart stuttered. Prescott. She had not thought about that town in years, had not spoken its name in longer than she could remember. "What do they want?" The man dismounted, removing his hat. He was gray-haired and dignified, with a kind face that seemed vaguely familiar. "Mrs. Lang. Zelda Anderson Lang." "I am Zelda Lang. Who are you?" "My name is Samuel Mitchell. This is my wife, Sarah. I do not know if you remember us. We lived in Prescott years ago." Zelda studied them, and slowly recognition came. Samuel Mitchell had owned the dry goods store next to her father's shop. Sarah Mitchell had sung in the church choir with her mother. Their daughter had been in Zelda's Sunday school class. "I remember," she said carefully. "What brings you here after all these years?" Samuel looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "May we speak with you? It is a long story, and we have come a very long way to tell it." Ethan had emerged from the cabin, alerted by the voices. He came to stand beside Zelda, his presence solid and reassuring. "I am Ethan Lang, Zelda's husband. Anything you have to say to her, you can say in front of me." "Of course." Samuel looked between them. "Mrs. Lang, we came to apologize. To tell you how sorry we are for what happened, for how we treated you, for failing you when you needed help." Zelda stared at him, not certain she had heard correctly. "You came all this way to apologize, after 30 years. "Yes, madam, I know it seems strange, but please let me explain." They moved to sit in the shade near the cabin. Caroline brought out water and coffee, and Zelda waited, her hand in Ethan's, as Samuel Mitchell gathered his thoughts. "After you left Prescott," he began, "people talked about you for a while, wondering where you had gone. But then they forgot, moved on to other gossip. It was like you had never existed. And I am ashamed to say I was one of those people. I had known your father, had respected him, had benefited from his kindness. But when he died and you were left alone, I did nothing to help. I looked away like everyone else." "Why?" Zelda asked. "Why did everyone turn away?" "Fear," Samuel said bluntly. "Fear that if we helped you, if we acknowledged you, we would be reminded of how fragile our own security was. Fear that the fever might return, that we might lose everything like your family did. It was easier to forget you than to face our own fears." He looked down at his hands. "That does not make it right, it just explains the cowardice." "What changed?" Ethan asked, his voice hard. "Why come now?" Sarah Mitchell spoke up, her voice soft but clear. "Our daughter died 5 years ago. She was married, had children, seemed healthy. Then she got sick, and within a week she was gone, just like that." Tears welled in her eyes. "And after she died, we saw how people treated our grandchildren. Oh, they were kind at first, brought food to the funeral, said pretty words. But then they moved on, forgot about those children's grief, their needs. We saw it happening, and we finally understood what we had done to you, Zelda. We had done to you what others were doing to our grandchildren. We had forgotten you when you needed us most. We tried to make it right," Samuel continued. "We took in our grandchildren, made sure they were cared for, that they knew they were not forgotten. But it was not enough. We could not stop thinking about you, about how we had failed. So we started asking questions, trying to find out what had happened to you. It took 2 years, but we finally traced you here to this valley." "Why does it matter?" Zelda asked. "It was 30 years ago. I built a new life. I do not need your apology." "Maybe not," Samuel said. "But we need to give it. We need to look you in the eye and tell you that we were wrong, that you deserved better, that we are sorry." He paused. "And we wanted to see that you were all right, that you had found happiness despite our failure." Zelda looked around at her valley, her home. At the cabin Ethan had built and expanded. At the garden she tended. At Caroline moving quietly near the doorway, at the sounds of grandchildren playing somewhere beyond the trees. At Ethan beside her, solid and strong, the man who had remembered her name. "I am more than all right," she said slowly. "I am happy. Happier than I ever was in Prescott, happier than I might have been if you had helped me. That life, the one you abandoned me to, led me here, led me to my husband, led me to this family and this place. So while I appreciate your apology, I do not need it. Your forgetting me was a gift, though you did not intend it that way." Samuel looked startled. "A gift?" "Yes, because if people in Prescott had helped me, I might have stayed. I might have rebuilt some pale shadow of my old life, trapped in a place that held only grief. Instead, I left. I came north with Ethan, and I found a life I love. A man who remembered me when everyone else forgot, who saw me when I was invisible, who gave me a family and a future." She squeezed Ethan's hand. You did me a favor, Mr. Mitchell, though cruelty was not kindness. Still, Sarah said softly, we had to come. We had to tell you we were sorry. Even if you do not need to hear it, we needed to say it. Then I accept your apology, Zelda said. I forgive you for looking away when I needed help. I forgive the people of Prescott for forgetting me. I hope it brings you peace. They talked for a while longer. The Mitchells told stories of Prescott, how it had changed, who had died, and who had moved away. Zelda listened politely but without much interest. That place was a lifetime ago, a different world. When the Mitchells finally left, heading back down the trail with John Porter, Zelda felt nothing but relief. Are you all right? Ethan asked after they were gone. Yes, better than all right. Seeing them reminded me of how far I have come, how much my life has changed. She turned to face him fully. They came to apologize, but I am the one who should be grateful. If they had helped me, if anyone in Prescott had helped me, I never would have met you. I never would have had this life. Their forgetting was the best thing that ever happened to me. Not their forgetting, my remembering. Yes, your remembering. You remembered me, Ethan. You spoke my name. You saw me when I had become invisible. That changed everything. He pulled her close, and she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. 30 years they had been together. 30 years of marriage and partnership and love. 30 years of building a life in the wilderness, of raising children, of growing old together. I love you, she said simply. I love you too, always have, always will. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant colors. Their grandchildren's voices carried on the evening air, laughter and shouts and the sounds of play. Smoke rose from the cabin's chimney, and the smell of dinner cooking wafted out. Everything was exactly as it should be. Zelda had been forgotten by everyone who once loved her. But Ethan had remembered her name and never forgot. And that single act of remembering had given her everything she had ever wanted and more than she had ever dreamed possible. She was home. She was loved. She was remembered. And she was exactly where she belonged.